Recording and share. Okay, so we're back online, and this will be pass number 2. Oh, it looks like Megan made it back. Cool. So this is the second attempt at capturing some tips and tricks for working with controls and getting your controls linked to your blend shape. I had made it, I think, about halfway through last time, so I may be it may be boring to watch the first half, but I'm going to recover it again just because it hasn't been captured yet on video. So with that being said, what we're going to be talking about today is getting some controls linked to the blend shapes on your character. And in the previous lesson, we looked at using the pose sculpting window and attaching new targets to a blend shape. And so this character is one that I just downloaded from the Autodesk Character Creator, and it comes in with a bunch of different blend shapes, which are useful for what we'll be doing. And each of these little sliders, you can see, affects the head in a different way. So what we're going to be talking about today is how you would link these blend shapes to something useful for animating, which would be a control on the head. The first type of control that we're going to talk about is one like this eyebrow, which is kind of hovering over an area of the head. And you can infer that if you were to move this control up and down, it's going to move that area of the face. Another type of control, which we'll go over, is a little bit different. It's one that kind of sits beside the head, and it maybe doesn't necessarily sit over top of the area it's going to affect. And the reason for that is maybe there are multiple of these type of blend shapes that affect the same area. So it would be kind of hard to tell the difference between, you know, if you had a little circle here and when you move it, it does the A shape. And then you have another little circle next to it and you move it, it does the U shape. Doesn't really make sense. So maybe it's easier just to have a little slider next to the head that's easy to grab in 3D space and also easy to add keyframe information to and start to animate doing things that way. So jumping into it, we'll talk about how did I get this thing in place, shaped, and affecting the blend shapes. The first thing that I would do for all of my face controls, regardless of whether it's this version or the other version, is to have a group that contains all of them. Because in the end, what we want is to be able to animate the character, have the head move around, and these controls would follow along. So they're not left behind if the character's walking or animating up and down. The eyebrow control follows along with the head. And so it makes sense that you can always select that, move it up and down, and keep animating. Put this back in a neutral position. Go. So we're good to go here. All right, so the first step to getting this control where it is and behaving how it is down here. If I look, basically all I did was click a neutral NURBS circle. So I clicked this button, dropped a fresh NURBS circle into the scene, and I'll actually go ahead and use that because this one doesn't have all of the bells and whistles. This one I know is going to be controlling the left eyebrow, so that's the first thing I'll do. I'll call this L brow control. CTR. All right. Oops. CTR, not TT. Cool. So I already have my two groups here, so I'm going to go ahead and nest this control inside of K group. And as we've discussed in previous lessons, the Z group is the one that you use to position the control in world space. The K group is useful if you want a little bit of extra flexibility. So if you ever do macros or fancy set-driven key stuff, it's nice to have this group here because if you attach set-driven keys or macros to the control directly, you couldn't put keyframe information on it. Those would conflict. So what you need to do if you want that flexibility is have this little K group so that you can do your macros on it. and leave this control open for just normal keyframe information. So the next step that I'm going to do is actually get this circle facing the right way. You can see that this control is kind of facing out, even though it's been modified heavily. So how you can do that, I'll flip back to my classic so it's a little clearer. Here underneath of inputs for a default NURB circle, you're able to click on it and affect the normal direction, which is just basically the direction that it's going to point. So right now, normal Y is 1, which is why it's pointing up. So if I want it to point forward, I'd want it to be Z. So if I type 0 for Y and 1 for Z, that just points the circle forward without modifying any of these base attributes. It also makes it so that if I move it up and down, the up and down movement is still on the Y axis, which is what I want. In general, I try and stick to vertical. Up and down is always the Y channel. It's nice to get in the habit of creating consistency with all of your rigging stuff. This is my habit. If you want it to always be the Z channel, then you can always do the Z channel. But because it makes sense for me, eyebrows going up and down, I'm going to stick to the Y channel for my up and down movement. So the other thing that you'll notice with this control is if I select it and I really go crazy with moving it, I can only ever go up to 1 or down to -1. So I've added some limitations to the movement on this character or on this controller. So to get that set up, if you select your attribute or select your NURBS curve and then come into the control, not the shape, go to your limit information, translate, and activate translate limit in the minimum and translate limit in the maximum. So if you check this box and you check this box, now if I type -1 and +1, this control can only ever go up to 1 or down to -1. So that's good. So that's the first step. The next step is getting this controller in place and scaling it down so that the movement of 1 to -1 matches the movement of the eyebrow on the character. So to get it in place, I'll select the Z group, switch to my quad view so it's a little easier to position. Using the front view and the side view. Get it from the top. It's about, looks pretty good. So then what I'll do is come in on the character itself and dial up the left eyebrow blend shape to its maximum. So I can see about where if I zoom out and I put this control to 1, and then I scale the Z group, you can see that it starts to move that down. So I just need to know how small to make that scale so that the up and down movement of 1 to -1 matches what the eyebrow does. So here, I'll select my character, select my expression node, scroll down and find eyebrow up here. So if I select both of those and dial that up to 1, you can see it really only moves just a little bit up. So if I select the Z group and I keep scaling it down, so the circle is pretty much centered right on top of the eyebrow still. If I look at the up and down movement of this now, it's much less, but it's still going from 1 to -1, which is really, really nice. You have these nice whole numbers. If I were to just try and match it by shrinking the control down and then just only moving it up and down as much as this eyebrow moves up and down, it would be like 0.012 or whatever would be my maximum, and then -0.12. It's not a very good numbering or clean system. So now that we have our Z group scale, we have our max and min working, we can set our character back to 0 for this eyebrow. That. Put the control back at 0 as well. And then modify the shape a little bit so that it kind of more refers to what this control is going to be for. So to do that, right click on NURBS curves. You can highlight those points, scale them out, rotate the face a little bit, grab individual points. Give a little bit of that eyebrow shape. Pretty good. So now we've got a eyebrow shape control that only goes up to 1, down to -1, and we're going to link it to our blend shapes now. So if I select my control, click the single channel, edit, set turn key. I got my window. I want my control to be the driver, so I'll click that and then click translate Y. So I know that this is the channel that's going to be driving the blend shapes. I'm going to switch back over to pose sculpting because I find it easier to grab the blend shape by clicking on it here. It's the gray icon versus the orange icon. That's the important thing to select. Right click on it and say select blend shape. No, you can do that. Then you can say load driven and all your blend shapes should appear over here, driven. So now all I need to do is find the 2 blend shapes that I was working with earlier. Yours might be a single blend shape, mine's 2 blend shapes, so I'm driving 2 at once. It doesn't really matter. This is just linking a control to a blend shape. So I've got L brow up, or no, L brow up and L brow up. It's a little hard to read. This is where it's a good example of naming. Separating things with underscores can sometimes help with readability. When you have tons of things and they're all right next to each other, it's hard to tell them apart. So if I were naming this, I probably wouldn't have all this garbage. I would separate the important piece of information with little underscores, which is the name. So brow up, I would probably have little separators on either side to make it easier to find. All right, so anyway, this doesn't have that. It is what it is. So the blend shape is set to 0, the control is set to 0, so we're ready to start. So if I hit key, now if I scroll down in my list, I can see that I've got a little blue in the field, which indicates that it's now a set driven key, which is these 2 here, or sorry, these 2 here. This is L brow up and L brow up. So now if I select my control, dial it all the way up to 1, and I push these over to 1. The key should have our 2 states. We have our 0 and our 1. So it's pushing those up to 1 and back down to 0. So the next one that I want to link is brow down, which are these 2, or these 2 in the list. So now that my control has been set back to 0, I've got my 2 brow down shapes selected. I'll hit key. You can see that I've got the blue indicators here in my set driven keys. I'll select my control once again, push it down to -1, dial up my brow down shapes, and key. So now I've got my up and my down linked to the same control. So this single control, moving nice and clean from 1 to -1, is driving 4 separate blend shapes, all evenly and easily animatable. I'll pause here for who's in the class. Any questions on kind of the steps on generating the control, positioning the control, limiting the control, and connecting the control to the blend shapes? Thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay. Okay, so that is the kind of, I think it's called diegetic, or that it has meaning. I'm not totally sure. This is still editable. You can modify the shape so that it makes more sense. All right, so I got my left brow and my right brow in shape. So what if I wanted to connect my ooh shape? Yeah, let's do that one, because that's going to actually be a little more complicated, and it might have some relevance to people that have multiple parts of the head that aren't connected. So some people might have the teeth separated from the head mesh. So with that single control, you're going to need to be driving 2 separate meshes and 2 separate blend shapes on those 2 separate meshes. What I mean by that is, so if I am on my head blend shape, you can see if I dial up ooh, the teeth are still closed. That's really not what would happen. This character has the teeth separated and blend shapes on those teeth. And so what I would need to do is also fire the ooh shape on the teeth. So I think that's this one. So what I want to do is when my control fires, and it looks like this might not be the right one because there's some cutting. That would be some really bad blend shaping if that's the case. Let's try and find our teeth. Correct one. It's AO, maybe this one. No. Maybe it's just a bad blend shape. In which case we can practice fixing stuff. Yeah, I think this is the right one. So what I'd want to do at this point is fix the blend shape on this head because I'm getting this, which is the teeth cutting through. So to make that happen, I'll select the blend shape, the offending one, right click, and rebuild target. Push it off to the side here. And then if you grab these couple verts maybe, or actually I'll push these faces in. It's probably the easiest one. So yeah, that part of the mouth doesn't seem to be working very well. So I've selected those couple faces, push it back in. So it's not cutting through the lip anymore. And you can see that it totally updates the blend shape over here. So now that that's good, get rid of that. Now my blend shapes are happy and working again. So I'll dial that down and dial that down. So that's our goal, is to get a control over here that's going to drive this shape that is on the head and drive the shape that's on the teeth at the same time. The control that I'll use for that is, in fact, another one of these ones. So this is the A. And here is my O. And I'll walk through the steps that I did to get this thing set up. So the first thing that I did was make a new nerve circle. I pointed it the kind of other direction with the same, flipping back to my classic, with the same trick of typing 0 for the Y and 1 for the Z. I scaled down the radius of this so that when I moved it up to 1, like that, it kind of had a little bit more difference. So this one, when you go from 0 to 1, it's a nice slider. This circle is so big that if you go up to 1, it doesn't really look like it's moving all that much. So I'll put the radius, and we make it 0.2. So now, if this goes up to 1, it really looks like it travels a good amount of distance. So that's the first trick. Then once that's in place, I want to make sure to name this, call this, what's my naming convention of mouth? Okay, we'll call this mouth F control. Because I've already got one called ooh, I don't want to redo that. But now that I have it named properly, I'll select my control, group it 2 times, using this name, paste it, change this to K group, and change this to Z group. Now that I have that, I can kind of push this off to the side and not worry about messing up any of the nice centered transforms on my main control. So the next thing that I'd want to make is maybe this outline shape. So to make that, I'm actually going to flip to my front view so that I'm able to draw using the Bezier curve tool. So if you go to your curves and surfaces menu, you can click on this option, which is your Bezier curve tool. And if you hold X, it'll snap each of the points to one of your grid things. And so you can get really nice straight lines and easy curves. So holding X, I'll click on that point there, and then click and hold the left button drag over, and it will snap so that you get this perfect curve. Holding X still, click, and then just left click again, click and hold, click, and then I'll end it here. But actually what I'll do is immediately right click on the curve, grab this point, holding X, snap it right on top of the other thing. So this curve isn't closed, but it looks like it's closed, and that's fine. All it is just for visual reference on how high up or down your control is currently. So now that I have the basic shape, what I'll do is snap the pivot point to this point right here so that I can move it right over top of my other control and then just start to scale it down. This is a little bit of eyeballing, which is fine because this isn't anything that I'm taking any values from. This is just visual reference. So this is as low as this control is ever going to go. So I've left a little bit of space here so you can see it. It's got like a little cushion. If I push this control up to its maximum, which like how we just learned, we want to make sure to activate our limit. And with this one, its lower limit is 0 and its upper limit is going to be 1. Push it up so that's as high as it's ever going to go. I can grab these control vertices and just kind of match like that. So now I have kind of a border to indicate how high up or down this control is going. The other thing that I'll do for this is to clear history. So clear history or delete history, freeze transformations, center pivot, all of that good stuff, so that then I can just drop it inside of the K group next to my control and give it a name so that I know what it is. So this is border. And then make this something that isn't selectable. So right now you can see I'm clicking and trying to actively select this thing. You can't, and that's because I've turned this object display into a reference instead of a normal. To do that, you just click the high level thing, go to display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and reference. And when you do that, it'll actually become black and not let you select it. It'll still follow around with the Z group because it's a child of it. So we've got one more step to go, and that's making the letters. So these letters you can generate using the text tool, which I think it's under polymodeling by default. Yeah, it's this little T. So I've got it just as part of my little custom shelf. So if you hit T, it'll automatically generate a couple of characters. It should, in the attribute editor, take you to the type 1 node, which lets you put whatever you need in here. This is going to be the FV shape. So now I've got this giant FV, and I'll go back to my type node and I'll make the font size just 1, so it's a little smaller. Pick it up here, scale it down a little bit. Okay, cool. So getting there. Go back to my perspective view, and you can see that it actually made 3D characters. That's what this tool does. I really only want the front faces. I don't want it to be 3D. I just want it to be like planes, like this thing. So to get that working, you can right click on it, just like a normal mesh, to the face, select the two that I want. So this F and this front V, and then holding shift, I'll drag select over top of everything, which inverts the selection. So I've deselected those front faces, but selected everything else, and then I can delete. So now I'm only left with those front faces. The final step is to make sure that this is snapped right in line with everything. So I'll hold D and V together to snap to the bottom corner of this thing, and then hold X and snap it to the grid. So now that everything's in line, the final step, I've got a material that is just a surface shader for all of my letters. I should probably name it here. Like that. So now I can add these to my letter material so they'll be nice and blue and uniform. I also want to delete history, freeze transformations, center pivot, do all that good stuff. So in my attribute editor, I really only have these couple things. This type mesh, which is just the default name that it gives it. So the naming convention, let's stick to that. So I'll call it label. And then drop it inside of my K group. So what this control is made of finally is my label, my border, my control. My control, I have limits so that it can only go up to 1 and down to 0. My border is not selectable, and I actually want to do that same thing here for my letters. So if I go back to my attribute editor, go to my label, I want to enable drawing overrides, switch this to reference. So now that is no longer selected. So at this point, what you would do is basically just put this where you think you might need it, scale it down to an appropriate shape. It's useful for animation. You can leave it bigger if you want. You can make it really, really, really small if you want. It's kind of a preference at this stage. So I'll try and match the size here. Cool. And then earlier, I guess, oh, dang it, I skipped over this. So the controls, you want to be contained all in a single group. And so I actually already have a group part of this character. And how I did this was to just go to create, empty group. I'll give it a name. So this is 10. This is just for demonstration purposes. What I would want to do is one of two things. You can either snap it in place by holding V and dragging over top of your joint so that it will go right to the head, or you could do the parent constraint trick of selecting your object first, selecting the empty group second, and doing the parent constraint with maintain offset not active. So what that is going to do is snap the group right in place. So if I hit apply, boom, it puts it right on top of the head, which is great. And then you can actually put that inside of your character. And this would be where you would put all of your controls. So that's the process that I went through originally with this face controls group. And that's the reason why if I were to rotate the head, you'll see, whoop, I accidentally unparent this stuff. Oops. Okay, that's why you'll see if I rotate the head, this A control is following along, but this new control that I just made isn't. And the moment that I select the Z group for this control, I'll make sure to kind of put it in approximately the same place as my other control. And scale it. Okay, cool. So the moment that I select my Z group and then put it inside of the space controls by parenting, so now it appears here. Now it follows along too. So that's basically how you can keep adding more and more face controls into a top level group that follows along with your character. So now that I have this FV on there, I actually want to also put this, oh, So I'll real quick go to words, reference, grab the control, drop it inside of my group using the Z group, scale it down. Put it in line with the other ones, roughly. Cool. And this one I didn't do my drawing overrides. You leave it normal, but then change the color. So I've been using blue. Where are you? There you are. Cool. All right, so I got this OO control. This is what I want to link to my multiple blend shapes here on this character. So at this point, I'll flip back to pulse sculpting. Select my OO, select translate Y, set driven key, make sure it's the driver. Make sure that translate Y is the channel that's doing the hard work. Then the first one I'll link up is my expression. So I'll right click, select blend shape node, load driver, find this OO shape. It's right here. So my control's at 0, my blend shape's at 0, key. Now I've got the blue tick, which indicates that I am, or this is now being controlled by a set-driven key. I'll drive it up to 1, drive this up to 1, and key one more time. Now I should be able to check that my blend shape is being driven by my control, which is good. So the next step is linking the teeth blend shape to it as well. So if I select that blend shape node, right click, select blend shape, load driven, then I need to find the corresponding blend shape here, which I believe is OO. Control is at 0, blend shape's at 0, hit key, dial up the control to 1, then dial up my OO to 1, and hit key. So now this single control is driving both of those blend shapes. Cool. So I'll pause there. Anybody that is present, do you have any questions on how that was working, how I made that control, and how I customized that control? Going once, going twice. Okay, cool. So that is the name of the game. So that, I guess, here's another control that's being left behind now. So if I rotated this head, the left brow control is not following along. So I want to make sure to drop all my controls into my face controls group so that if I rotate the head, all this stuff is following along. So save that. Great. And that's pretty much the process you'll need to go through for driving your blend shapes. The hard part here, in my estimation, is figuring out which controls will be best to be kind of with this modality, which is like referencing an area on the face that it's actually affecting, versus this kind of control, which is kind of pushing a blend shape that maybe other things are also working on. And you can see here, by separating these and having multiple controls, you can drive both of these blend shapes at the same time and create more shapes than just what the two original blend shapes are. So by combining them, now you have a third shape. It's pretty cool. What I would say is needed for this project, as far as the shapes that you'll want for mouth animation for lip syncing, I think you could pretty much get there as long as you have, for decent facial performance, you have some eyebrow controls, so up and down on the eyebrows. You probably would also want maybe some scrunching, so maybe some in, so a shape for that. Then shapes for blinking. So being able to blink is pretty important. Otherwise, people get very unnerved. Good movie fact. One reason why Silence of the Lambs, if you've ever seen that, Anthony Hopkins, people find that performance disturbing. It is a subtle thing. There is not a single shot in the whole movie when he blinks. And that is kind of a thing that your brain interprets as a danger. Fun fact. The other shapes that you would need for the mouth, the big one that you would want is definitely a jaw open. So being able to have your overall mouth just do a jaw open that all other blend shapes can build on is really helpful. So let's see if this one has a jaw. I believe this will be it. Nope, that's jaw left and right. We need to try and find which one it is, but basically that's what I would recommend. Jaw open. If you wanted to go the extra mile and get a little bit of a side on the jaw, that gets you, a little bit more flexible, a little bit more freedom with the jaw movement. So having an up and down as well as a little bit of side to side, those would be two good blend shapes to have, or I guess three technically, open, left, and right. Then the lip shapes that will be 100% necessary would be like an A, E, so kind of a an open one, and then an U, so a forward U, and an F, and an M, so probably 4 for that. I'll write this down so it's a little bit easier to follow. But in my estimation, you could probably get away with about 12 to 18 blend shapes would be about what you should shoot for this road. Cool. So I will stop recording here and use this as our reference point for getting things set up with controls, but I will meet up with people individually and check on progress at this point.